Matt, I'll go ahead and introduce you a little bit, and then let's jump in and feel free. Brian, good to see you. Um, Feel free to, if you need permission to do some slides, let's see if I can do that.
It looks like I can share.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let me say that our speaker, Matt Hancock, is a principal with a consulting group called Praxis, which is all about employee ownership. He is also a co-founder of the Chicago Tech Academy,
Hmm.
Chicago's first technology-focused high school. And he began his career, interestingly, in Bologna, in Italy, where he earned a master's in cooperative economics from the University of Bologna. He authored a book called Compete to Cooperate about the big co-op movement in Italy. He's a member of the European Organization Design Forum. He's got a BA in history from Skidmore. He's a green belt in Lean Six Sigma and is the past chair of the ESOP Association's Ownership Culture Committee. Hi, John. Lovely. We've got some thoughtful people on this call, so we better say something thoughtful. All right, Matt, great to have you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Wonderful. All right, thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here. It's humbling, especially when someone reads off these are some of the accomplishments. I saw a nod when you heard Chicago Tech Academy. So if anyone's in Chicago or has friends, I highly recommend connecting with that school. They're still doing amazing work, and there's lots of kids who need your connections and social capital. Um, I was gonna make this. I think we have an hour, correct, Elias?
Yeah,
All right,
or
great.
a
So
little.
I'm
We got a little wiggle room. We can go a little long if we
okay. I'm
need
going to
to.
try to give you some framing. Elias, as you were saying, kind of zooming out and then zooming in. We can talk plenty about social cooperatives. I'm going to try to give you a more of an overview about the region. Why should we even care about the
Great,
region? What is the role of cooperatives in
great.
that model? And I'm going to share my screen. I made some slides and I asked for forgiveness ahead of time for any typos because there are typos. So my hope is that we can, let's see, do you see goals right now? I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah,
calibrating my screens
yeah, that's
correctly.
good.
Great. So if I
Hmm.
do this, it looks like I'm looking at you, right?
Yeah,
Yes. All right. And I can remember what I'm supposed to say too. So that was what I wanted to do. I want to also make sure that we have time for questions and dialogue. That's the most
sure.
fun for me.
Yep,
And I hope that we can have fun. And at least I'm going to try to have fun so it keeps me awake for the rest of the hour.
right.
Um, I'm wondering if maybe in the chat you could just say, I guess you don't need to say your name, but what do you do? And so maybe role and affiliation. I'm always curious about where people grew up. And if there's something that you're curious about that you want to drill down on today, that will be really helpful. And while you're doing that, I can tell you the answers to those questions that I'm asking you. I grew up just off of this exit on the Garden State Parkway in Bergen County, New Jersey. And actually, what's interesting, there's the exit here, 160 for Hackensack. That's where I spent the first 8 years of my life. It's also where Miles Davis recorded a bunch of his early albums, Cookin'
There
Workin'
you
and
go.
whatever I can't remember the third one. Um, I think Frank Sinatra also recorded there. And then I moved to Ridgewood, New Jersey, just outside of Paramus, New Jersey here, which is what you can see. And I can't see the chat, but are people doing what I said and putting things in the chat?
Let's see here. Beginning to, yeah.
Okay, good. I love it. Oh, nice. All the way from Mexico. Okay.
Fun, cool.
Oh, Leaf. Yes. Awesome. All right. I was just in New Haven, Connecticut a week ago, and I've been to Mexico twice. Thank you. Hey, Brian. I always forget about Maine for some reason, Brian. Morgantown. Yes.
What is
Okay.
he doing in Maine? That's weird. All right.
That's where he grew up. Oh, nice. All right.
Columbus.
Catholic
Ah, yeah, Emma.
worker.
Great.
Nice. Oh, this is so great. I'm going to keep this open so that we can multi-stakeholder. We can talk about multi-stakeholder co-ops today too. Grew up in, well, New York will do that to you, right? New York. It's really hard growing up just outside of New York and then moving to Chicago and tasting a bagel from Chicago for the first time. It was
Hmm.
pretty disgusting.
I
He's
know
a,
what you mean.
and I think that's how Brian, you and I connected on, well, you connected with me on LinkedIn around the OEOC, which is near and dear to my heart. Um, awesome. Oh, wow. That's a big farm. It feels like big to me at least. Um,
Hmm.
so I grew up in New Jersey, and that conjures in your mind what it means to grow up in New Jersey, you're probably right about it. And luckily, I got to study my junior year in a town called Urbino in Le Marche region of Italy, which is
Nice.
part of these, what became to be described in the post-war period as the red regions in Italy. And so this is a view. I didn't take this picture, but this is the view from my dorm when I was in Urbino for a year, a college town. And then this is the castle, the walled
Yeah.
city of Urbino. And what's interesting and important about Urbino is the Duke went on this, he went out and conquered all the nearby city states at some point in the 1400s. And with the loot that he plundered, he started to do things like fund the arts. And one of the people that was born in the town of Urbino is a painter you may have heard of called Raphael.
Hmm.
And so it's actually the Duke of Urbino plundering, and you can make of that what you will. And maybe it's a good metaphor for capitalism too. But he used what he plundered to fund basically the Renaissance. My interest in all things Italian and social change, that's what I did ever since I was in eighth grade. I really made Mayor Mancuso in Ridgewood, New Jersey upset when I protested the floodplain mitigation projects that he had that was going to destroy the natural habitat. I was focused on activism, and then it just became in love with Italy. So Italy and activism brings me to Bologna. This is the St. Stephen's Square in Bologna. If you could turn around and look behind you, you'd see this beautiful seven churches. But we're looking towards the Twin Towers in Bologna, a lot smaller than the Twin Towers in New York. One of them is leaning. But that brings me to Bologna, Italy. And I really actually didn't, I mean, I could tell the story of my life as like everything is leading up to cooperatives and Bologna and labor. I really just wanted to be in Italy. I was working
Hmm.
at a place called the Center for Labor and Community Research in Chicago at the time. So, working with unions, businesses on industrial retention, keeping manufacturing local. And I picked Bologna because I knew it had a good university. Turns out it's the first university ever.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful town, as you can see. And I saw before I moved there, I saw an Italian Led Zeppelin cover band in the basement of the Irish pub, and I thought this would be a great place to spend some time as a student. What I ended up doing, and I used this image for a presentation I did for the Industrial Commons, and I thought I'm going to keep it in here because I'm going to challenge myself to remember what I was trying to communicate with this image, and it came to me. So what I studied when I went to Bologna, I got my degree in cooperative economics at the University of Bologna. So studying co-ops, and that's the middle symbol here, this sort of traditional org chart. And you'll see why I think of a traditional org chart when I think of co-ops. But I was studying cooperatives. On the left, you see this image, which for me represents networks. And so we'll get into this a little bit, but one of the other defining features of this unique economy and society is there's no really, by our sort of classification, there's no such thing as a large business in Emilia Romagna.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
these small micro enterprises that are doing things like sophisticated manufacturing that are networked more as peers than in a hierarchy, and they're competing globally. And then this image on the right here, I think she's got a hard hat and some PPE on. That was to symbolize the work that I did with labor. So I worked at a think tank called the Institute for Labor when I was there. And what we were doing is we were studying new forms of work organization. So lean manufacturing, participatory management, how do
Right.
you decentralize things as a way to leverage the talents of the people who make things so that we could keep these small businesses competitive, but also locally rooted in Emilia Romagna. And that got me into things like collective bargaining, and we can talk about that if you've got questions. So why should we care about Emilia Romagna? That's really the next section, and I want to make the case for that. So here's where Emilia Romagna is in Italy. You can see that red region there on the image on the right, and it's a part of what Ginsburg, who's a professor at the University of Florence, he wrote two great books that I highly recommend. Like anyone should read them, and especially if you're interested in Italy, you should read them. One is, I think it's called The History of Contemporary Italy. Fascinating story. And he does focus on these regions. And the other one is Italy and its discontents. But he starts talking about, or he brings into the English sort of vocabulary the idea of the third Italy. So the first and the second Italy, the first Italy is up here in the northern part, so Piedmont, Lombardy, Veneto. That's where you've got manufacturing, you've got a capitalism that looks a lot more like the one we're used to. So big business. That's where fiat is made. So the Detroit of Italy is up there. And with all the sort of socioeconomic stuff that goes along with that, the kind of a labor movement that goes along with that. Then you've got the other Italy, which is the south of Italy. They never really come out of feudalism. They never really shake off there we go. Thanks, Elias. The sort of legacy of those large, landholders, absentee landholders, um, and they have industry in the south of Italy, but it really can never survive without massive state intervention. And then you've got this third Italy, Emilia Romagna, Tuscany, Umbria, and Le Marche. And you can see Le Marche, which is where I studied in my junior year on what's this, the right coast, the east coast of Italy. These were regions that didn't have the big business of the North, that didn't have the state supports and propping up of the economy of the South. And what developed there was this really vibrant, small firm economy that sometime in the 1960s and 70s, economists and sociologists and Putnam's first book, long before Bowling Alone, was called Making Democracy Work. And his case study was not a case study, it was his whole theory was built around what he learned by walking around the piazzas of Emilia Romagna. So that's the third Italy. The interesting thing about Emilia Romagna in particular, and why I have this map on the left, if you look, and I don't know if I have an ability to point things out, but if you look on the bottom right-hand side of this Rimini, on the coast,
Hmm.
all the way up to the top left, Piacenza, that green road, which is now a highway, that's called the Via Emilia. And that's a road that was built by the Romans to connect the coast with Piacenza. And it's in the beginning of the sort of the Great Plains of Italy to the north. And to the south, you have the Apennine Mountains. And all of these important cities begin to develop starting in the Roman times through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. And those are still the main economic centers of the region along that Via Emilia. And you could interrupt me at any time. We like that up in Bergen County, New Jersey, so don't feel bad about that. So what am I showing you here? There's a silkworm on the top left. So one of the things that they would do starting, I think, in the Middle Ages, was they would cultivate silkworms in the farmland outside of the cities. In the cities, and if you go to Bologna today, you won't see this, but Bologna has as much canals as Venice does. It's just all covered. And so somebody in I think 1300s invented a silk mill that was powered by water. and they would put these factories along the side of the canal. And there's still a couple of places where, if you look carefully, you can't see a silk mill, but you can see these houses that are right up on the canals. And you can imagine this silk mill operating with the big water wheel being powered by the canals. And so the historians from Bologna will actually argue, I think quite convincingly, that capitalism does not begin in England. It begins many hundreds of years earlier with the
Hmm.
invention of this industrial silk mill. And you have the first factory rules, and modern forms of work organization are actually in Bologna. None of us know about this because in the 1700s, Napoleon comes through and he decides that he's going to physically destroy the silk industry of Bologna so that Lyon can become the world center of silk production. But that legacy of countryside and city being connected, of the rural and the industrial economies being intimately connected and one building on the other, is still very much a part of the modern economy. You can see it everywhere. And then, of course, we've got the University of Bologna, my alma mater, which was started in 1088. So back in they celebrated their millennium, their thousandth year anniversary a couple of decades ago, and that really was the first university. So when I was learning about the history of Bologna, especially in the Middle Ages, I kept thinking how when I learned about that period of our history, we called it the Dark Ages. And if you were in Bologna, it was anything but the Dark Ages. Art, science, industry, the university is being invented in those, the depths of the Dark Ages. So that's the sort of foundation on which everything is built today. So I want to just take a little bit of time to convince you that it's not just beautiful and it's not just interesting because there's a lot of co-ops, that they're producing results from an economic and a social perspective that matter, that should make us care about what's going on here. So this is GDP per capita, normalized, looking at it, comparing it in terms of purchasing power parity. So we can compare these economies. So you could see I've highlighted Emilia Romagna here, higher than the EU average. And if you look at who's ahead of them, it's much more sort of traditional manufacturing economies. Sweden, and I'm sorry, we're comparing regions, not countries here, because that wouldn't be fair to compare the region of Emilia Romagna to the country of Sweden, for example. But you can
Hmm.
see how they stack up. So from a GDP and output perspective, it's an important economy in Europe's economy and globally. But then if we look at, okay, so what about from a wage perspective? It's even better from that perspective. We're looking at it in terms of wages. Only Lombardy, which is right again, the sort of traditional, as we might think about capitalism and manufacturing, and Freiburg, which I know nothing about, but they've got a lot of disposable income in Freiburg. But you can look at all of the other countries, the regions, Stockholm, um, the Veneto region, Tuscany, and here's the EU average, much higher than the EU average in terms of disposable income. But what about from a poverty perspective?
Hmm.
This is Emilia-Romagna's place in Europe as a region in terms of poverty, one of the lowest levels of poverty in the region. I don't want to, make you think that this is some utopia. There is poverty in Emilia-Romagna. It's troubling. It's troubling to policymakers. It's very much linked to immigration these days. But in terms of strength of the economy, income, and poverty, it's one of the best places that you could live in Europe. And what I'm trying to show here is that they're doing all these things with comparatively lower populations. So the Lombard region has a much higher GDP than Emilia-Romagna, but they also have a much bigger population. So there's something about how their economy works that's driving um, at these results. And we call that the Emilian model. A guy named Sebastian Brusco was the first one to talk about the Emilian model. And it might not have been until the 80s or early 90s that he did that. So here are just some of the stats. on the region under 5 million in population, just south of 200 billion euros in terms of the regional GDP. The unemployment rate today, which is still low, when I was there in the early 2000s, it was like under 3% in the major regions. So there's an impact of the Great Recession that continues. They never fully recovered from that, but still today. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's almost 400,000 individual businesses for a region of less than 5 million people. 72% of those businesses are family owned. And so that means that there's very little foreign ownership, very little firms that are publicly owned, and most of these firms that are not family owned are most likely cooperatively owned, not foreign investment or publicly traded firms. And the average size of a business in Emilia Romagna is less than 5 employees. Now, it's higher for manufacturing, but not much. It's like 10 to 15 is the average for a manufacturing company business. So somehow they're figuring out with this really strange mix how to be globally competitive. And they are so globally competitive that you've got, well, we'll see that. So I think as I think about the model, and this is something that, some of these are the core of this is something that you could read about in the literature. The two things that I'm adding here that I think are inseparable to think about the model is number one, the role of social movements, in particular organized labor, and the cooperative movement. And you won't find that, I think, in a lot of the literature on the regional model. It is the highest union density in Europe, and we've seen that that's consistent with that high union density can exist with high GDP and low unemployment and low levels of poverty. So don't let anyone tell you that can't happen. Um, but I think if you look at from a politics and a policy perspective, there really has been for decades and decades this idea that we can achieve strong economic growth, we can achieve a good standard of living, and we can do that in a way that fosters innovation and social dialogue and consensus. Um, what I'm trying to show here, and I'm sorry, it's all in Italian, is the importance of cooperatives in making this all work, because I think co-ops oftentimes get short shrift. And I realized this when I was interviewing, I was with Margaret Lund, who some of you know. We were interviewing a policymaker who's been through the 90s and 2000s. He was a major part of the economic policies. He's a really deep thinker. And I asked him um, if he saw the fact that the largest businesses in the region typically have been co-ops, not privately held businesses. Have they played a role in driving innovation? Because that's where you get resources, and that's where you get um, some heft in terms of enterprise size. And he goes, you know what? Sorry, my point is not how smart I am. The point is how underappreciated I think the role of co-ops is in those economic results. He said, you're right, and I've never thought of it that way. So what I'm trying to show you here is if we look at this last line here where it says grandi, I don't know if you can, let me see if I can do some kind of annotation. Here, I'm going to get like a laser pointer. Or a spotlight. Tell me if this works. Can you see this? I'm highlighting where it says
Yeah, yeah.
250. So those are the number of businesses in the whole region that have more than 250 employees. There's only 452 businesses that have more than 250 employees. Oops. They're employing about 380,000 people. Of those 452, 113 are cooperatives.
Hmm.
So that's, uh, so 25% of large firms with over 250 employees are cooperatively owned. And that's not an accident. That's because for a long time, the only way you could amass significant resources as a business was by being a cooperative. And so those co-ops are in manufacturing, in logistics, in not agriculture, in like consumer products, right? So the things that you would buy on the supermarket shelf in terms of perishable and non-perishable items, you might not know it because the brand is something that they created, but behind that brand is a cooperative. So the way I like to envision co-ops is oftentimes they are at the very top of this value chain, and they're providing resources to pull that value chain up. They're providing the ability for that value chain to be successful on a regional, by that I mean European and global economy. So hopefully I'm communicating to you how important co-ops have been in this in making this work economically. So here's just some facts about the cooperative movement in Emilia Romagna today. Just north of 4,000 co-ops. 1% of all of those, I mean, we talked about the 383,000 businesses. So not surprisingly, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the total number of businesses. But here again, 25% of those large businesses are cooperatives. 3 million members, and that includes workers. That includes people like me who went shopping at Co-op, which is the name of the cooperative grocery store. That includes people receiving, in some cases, services through social cooperatives. It includes farmers. It includes people who get their electricity and their phone service and who are charging their electric vehicles through a co-op. 67% of the whole population is a member of a co-op one way or the other. And they're also a major driver of employment. 233,000 people directly employed by co-ops. So I'm not even talking about the multiplier effect on the larger economy. Um, the total revenue is just under 50 billion euros. And so the percentage of GDP is much lower than you might have read in the John Rostaka's article from 15, 20 years ago. And it's because he was doing the math he was comparing regional GDP to revenue by co-op. So it's less than 10% of the GDP is produced by co-ops. But that makes sense because, again, those co-ops are these larger firms that are buying their inputs, right, from all these smaller firms. And the GDP is it's value add. So the value add is happening along that value chain. But without those co-ops to be at the top of those value chains, none of those other businesses would be able to do what they're doing. Um, so this is how I think about the co-op from a sort of the model, if you will. Um, I'm trying to show you that, right, that hourglass image here, where we've got the business on the bottom. And when you go, and that's employees who are members and non-members, I'm imagining a worker-owned cooperative here. Um, if you go talk to a manager in a cooperative movement, they're going to spend a lot of time talking about hierarchy, about structure, and there's some historical reasons for that. But they like to say that from a business perspective, we are run just like any other business, with the CEO hired by the board of directors. But this is where it gets to be a little bit different. The board of directors is directly elected by the member assembly. Um, the member assembly is where the budget is discussed and passed. It's where the financial statements are reviewed each year. So while day to day, those of you who are looking for examples of participatory management, of less hierarchy, you're likely to be disappointed. But from the perspective of how the members participate, particularly in these larger, well-established manufacturing cooperatives, that member assembly might be meeting once a month, more as needed and informally if they're discussing, contentious issues like we might need to sell a part of one of the divisions of our business. So democracy is happening here at the member assembly. It's one person, one vote. From a cooperative principles, the International Cooperative Alliance principles, they're adhering to most of them, but the open door policy, the way they describe it is the door is open ajar. Now, if I'm an employee who I work in, in a co-op that's doing facilities management, and I'm cleaning, a facility, or if I'm working in the co-op that does manages cafeterias in the workplace, it's very easy to become a member. And it's almost automatic, and the entry fees are membership fees are very low, and they'll take it out of my paycheck. But in these larger, globally competitive manufacturing companies, it really is a privilege to become a member of the co-op. So everybody has the opportunity to ask, but not everybody will be allowed to join. But you also so there's some trade-offs that they're playing with. They typically have a smaller percentage of workers as members. The barrier to entry is pretty high because I'm paying a significant fee, tens of thousands of euros to become a member. But the quality of the discussion in the member assemblies, the level of involvement and democratic decision making among those members is really, really enviable. Enviable. I think to understand what makes Italian co-ops really unique is that you cannot be considered a co-op if you don't have what's called indivisible reserves. And an indivisible reserve means of our profit each year, I'm going to take some of that profit, I'm going to put it into a separate structure that no member can ever benefit from individually. So it's not like shareholders' equity, where when I leave, I'm taking that with me. The co-op can use those funds, those reserves, to grow the co-op. It can use it to go buy another business. It can use it to invest in purchasing new equipment. It can be used to keep people employed during an economic downturn, but it can never be paid out to an individual member. And that becomes both an expression of uh, it. So it begins, I think, historically as a way to express intergenerational solidarity. You're putting your money where your mouth is. You really are saying that I am a steward of this asset for future generations. And then once you get these significant assets and the indivisible reserves, that you could, even if you sold the co-op, you'd have to send the whatever indivisible reserves you have, they'd have to go to the co-op movement. No member would benefit from it if you demutualize. It also becomes a poison pill, if you will, protecting the co-op against demutualization. Um, then in the 90s or 2000s, they add another level of solidarity among co-ops. They say by law, if you are a co-op, 3% of your profits every single year have to go to a cooperatively managed mutual fund. And those funds, I'm sorry, private equity fund, those investment banks exist through debt or equity to grow the cooperative movement. Um, so these are the three main mutualistic funds that are funded through those 3% contributions. They lose money. So from the perspective of private equity, they are mismanaged. But they can afford to do that because every single year, 3% goes into those funds. They're not losing money because they're making bad investments. But Elias, you and I, and maybe some others on this call were at the Francesco Collaborative meeting where we're talking about what does true impact investment mean. And one of the conversations there was it's not just about a market return in a way that's consistent with your values. Maybe it has to be accepting below market returns because it's the right thing to do. And that's what they're really embodying here. And this is just one of those funds, but in 30 years, they've raised 600 million euros, invested 1.2 billion in 1,200 projects. So you can see here, they're not squandering the resources, right? They've invested 1.2 billion and they've only raised directly 600 million from that 3%. The cooperative movement as a whole, and I've got about like 3 minutes left, so we're going to hopefully let the questions rip soon. I just want to try to give you a overall picture of the cooperative movement. The Italian flag is red, white, and green. And that's what the labor movement looks like. That's what the cooperative movement looks like. So here we have Lega Co-op on the left side of my screen, at least. That's the traditionally socialist and communist aligned cooperative movement. And within that business association, you have all different every sector of the cooperative movement is represented. So it's not just ag or not just worker owned or not just social co-ops. It's all of them together represented by Lega Co-op. These ideological differences are much less significant today than they once were, but they were once very important. In the middle here, you have Conf Cooperativa, which is white, traditionally aligned with Catholic social teaching and the Christian Democratic Party. Again, that was the voice of co-ops across sectors that were aligned with the Christian Democratic Party and Catholic social teaching. And on the right is the green. I don't know if you'd call them non-aligned or maybe social democratic. Some jokes would be CIA aligned, but that's probably not fair. AGCI, which is the other of the three major cooperative movements, they still exist separately. They're making attempts to merge into this thing called the Alliance of Italian Cooperatives, and maybe over time they will truly be one voice. But right now, it really only exists on paper. I want to conclude with just some things that I think for me really um, communicate or evoke the values of the cooperative movement and the way that you can still see them at play today if you were to go visit Emilia Romagna. So when I was in Emilia Romagna between 2021 and 2023. And I think it was in 2023, there were these terrible floods. It rained for days on end. Some of the major streets within the city of Bologna flooded over, and you couldn't, drive down them for at least a week. But what was happening out in the countryside and out in the hills was really dramatic. There were mudslides and rock slides happening. And the city of Ravenna on the coast was really threatened. They thought that the city itself might be flooded and undergo significant damage. And so one of the cooperatives which is actually an interesting agricultural cooperative because most ag co-ops in Italy, like in the United States, are farmer-owned cooperatives. There's not a lot of success with cooperatives of farm workers. But this is one example of a cooperative of farm workers. And the cooperative said, and this is I'm gonna try to get through this without choking up, so bear with me. But just try to imagine you're a farmer, you're dealing with one of the worst, weather events of the last 30 years. And so the headline is, this is how Ravenna, the city, was saved from the floods. And this is the farmer's quote: flood my fields, save the city. So the co-op said, open the levees so that my
Wow.
fields will be flooded because I don't want to sacrifice the city. And
Hmm.
Ravenna, back in it's home to these amazing mosaics inside of its churches. And after Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire, shifted from Rome to Constantinople, Ravenna was this really important city. It was like the connection between East and West for many hundreds of years. So architecturally important. Some of you, Brian and I, actually visited this cooperative. It's called CIM, which I found out later that stands for the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is the name of the parish that the parents whose special needs kids were aging out of the public services. So they were turning 18 and 21. They had no place to go. And so the parents got together and created a social cooperative, which would be a long-term, they don't sleep here, but it was a community for them to be able to continue to receive services and to be engaged in work that is dignified and meaningful from the perspective of the individual, but that was also productive for the larger community. So if you go to this social cooperative, they are putting together things that are, their clients are pharmaceutical manufacturers, they're automobile manufacturers. They also have a sheltered workshop that's producing beautiful ceramics and other handcrafts. And they got a wonderful restaurant that ever since they've opened it has had a major negative impact on the restaurants in the neighborhood because everybody wants to be eating there. And so this is a picture of one of the sheltered workshops where they're working. I think this is work for a pharmaceutical manufacturer who probably sells in the United States as well. And this is a um, lyrics from a Vinicio Capossela song, who's a great singer-songwriter, contemporary singer-songwriter in Italy. And I just love what this says. It says, with the keys that we have, only those, we will we will will sing a song that has no teeth, a melody that we found. With the keys that we have, black and white, we'll play, and out of limits, we will create possibility.
Hmm.
This is from the same social cooperative, but I just loved this phrase. So there's an Italian activist and writer who says, one time I would participate in collective actions. I was part of a community, and I really liked the motto, we are all necessary, but nobody is indispensable. Today, I believe that the reverse is true. I've convinced myself that nobody is necessary, that everybody instead is the fruit of a providential and totally gratuitous accident. That if one of us came into being, that excludes an infinite number of other possibilities that didn't happen. Everybody is a gift. Everybody is an addition that was not necessary, that does not go to solve any problem, but that does enrich all of us. Um, Life is this excess of nature, an exaggeration, an exaggerated offering that is not necessary, but that is that can't be substituted. Everyone is a unique piece. Um, how would you say irrepeatable in, I guess, irrepeatable? Um, whose purpose is a total waste without any from like an economic perspective, right? It's a complete waste, but nobody can be substituted. And so he concludes with this idea that the world goes ahead by the strength of these gifts and these dissipations, is what he calls them, these amazing gifts and abrupt cancellations, excess and mancanza, which would be like missing of something. It is not a balanced system of credits and debits. It is not a double entry. That's what he concludes with. Nobody is necessary, but everybody is indispensable. And I thought that
Hmm.
just really captured that notion of nobody is necessary, but everybody is indispensable of this social co-op, but more broadly of what you can see, what you can touch when you go visit this part of Italy. And I promise to shut up, so I will.
Wow, that was great. That was great. Is this amazing part of the world? I mean, why is this a secret, right? Is the thing you keep wondering with that kind of prosperity and that low level of inequality and that social cohesion. There's a lot to talk about there. Anyway, I'll be quiet and I'll let people jump in here. Questions for Matt?
Or comments or challenges.
Yeah. Anybody?
And you'll have to unmute.
Sure. I'm jumping in. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
Now we can't hear you.
And now you froze up, I think, Zev.
Hey.
You're
Yeah,
in and
thanks.
out.
That was really intriguing and informative to. Oh, can you hear me?
In and out.
Hello?
Yeah,
You
you're
may
going
have
in
to
and
put it
out,
in
Zev.
chat. I don't
Okay.
know. Now you're
Yeah.
better.
Let me let me try without video. All right. How about this? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm particularly interested in in social co-ops and the application of that structure for home health care
Yep.
in the US, home healthcare co-ops. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering to what extent have home healthcare co-ops like what ICA is working to help incubate picked up the kind of diverse funding stream approach of the way that I understand social co-ops to be set up? And like,
Hmm.
do you think that it's possible to pull that off in the States, given that we don't have the constitutional support for it like they do in Italy?
That's a great question, and you've clearly done some studying. So, I think you've got a pretty good grasp on it. Sounds like. So,
Yeah.
real quickly, there's two types of social co-op in Italy. One is a type A, which is a worker co-op that happens to provide social services. So the social workers
Mm.
are the owners in that case.
Uh-huh.
Um, not particularly unique. And I don't mean to belittle it, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
it's a traditional co-op model, and they're receiving public funding to provide social services. And instead of being employees of the city or of the local health system or of the, state government, they're employees of a co-op. And it's a way, in a lot of ways, certainly recently, it's become a way to privatize services that were
Right.
either previously provided publicly or to do more services and that the public sector can't do. The type B social co-op, and there's been a
Yeah.
huge, I mean, if you go to certainly in the central northern part of Italy, public services, most of them are now provided by social co-ops, except for like doctors and nurses.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a type B social cooperative, which is, we might think of it as a social enterprise, where
Mm.
members are, some of them are the people that work there, and the other members are the clients receiving services or their families. And it's mixed model governance by design. And the
Mm.
therapeutic intervention, in some ways, the democratic governance becomes part of the intervention itself. And
Mm.
those are the businesses that have, those are the social co-ops that have set up alternative funding streams. So they're, doing work for private companies through these
Yeah.
sheltered workshops. They have a restaurant that is legitimately the best restaurant in the area, and people are coming there. And so they're using that to fund their activities. Um,
Mm.
so I actually think that we shouldn't be waiting around for the Constitution or laws, because
Mm.
Italy is a case study in how not to do that. All the
Mm.
things that are now law or in the Constitution was preceded by people just saying, we're going to do this. So the first
Mhm.
social
Yep.
co-op was years before the law established
Yep.
that a social co-op was even a
Mm.
thing. So I think we can kind of just do it. And
Mhm.
I actually think that if you look at some of our social enterprises in the United States, Homeboy Industries, what's Bill Strickland's thing in Pennsylvania? Someone help me out. Um,
Mm. I don't know.
anyway, look up Bill Strickland, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Like we've got these, or Grayston Bakeries. We've got these examples of successful social enterprises. Could we introduce some economic democracy into those? Or could we learn,
Yep.
could we say we're going to learn from these successful social enterprises and build one that's got cooperative governance? Did I answer enough of your question?
Well, you definitely touched on it. I guess I want to see if I'm understanding it correctly and maybe pose a follow up, which is that um, my understanding of some of the social co-ops, and I guess I'm not sure if it would be type A or type B in the typology you're just sharing with us, but is that they can take revenue both from clients via pay for service as well as from municipal and state
Mhm.
funding that essentially subsidizes it and allows for lower income people to get the service, but also higher income people to pay for the service, and therefore creates a holistically viable financial model.
So I
Um,
think you're
yeah.
getting close, but just
Okay.
in Italy, it's very rare for people
Mm.
to be paying privately for these services, because
Okay.
there's just a better, social,
Yeah.
from that perspective, support system.
Sure.
Um, and so the extra
Mm.
money is really coming from profit that they're generating through their own
Mm.
business activities. So when we
Mm.
went in the example that I was sharing with those pictures I was sharing you, it's a type A and B social co-op. So they have
Mm,
some public funding for
mhm.
services that are provided by, social workers. I think they'd be mostly, Brian, would they be mostly social workers here or aides,
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think, probably. Case managers, maybe.
Mhm,
yeah. And then they have the type B, which has these businesses which are selling stuff. Now,
mhm,
there's a little bit of an advantage for like a private company who works with a social co-op can satisfy their legal obligation to hire a certain percentage of employees with special needs because they're
mm,
working with the social co-op. So there's some
mm,
help there.
mm, mhm.
Labor in a social co-op costs less because they're not paying into the basically Social Security. Um,
Oh,
so they're able to bring the
interesting.
labor costs down.
Mhm,
Um, and I
mhm.
guess the third thing that I wanted to mention, it came went into my out of my head that felt important. Oh goodness. Wow. I was like, make them
Mm.
that pin that there because you got to tell them and it'll come back to me.
It was going to be the brilliant thing that was going to solve all of our
Right.
problems too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
I would just suggest, Matt,
Thanks.
that in our research on social co-ops for Minsun's Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, the kind of light bulb or one of them that occurred to us was realizing that even in Italy, where social co-ops have had a reliance on government contracts, we were hearing from the younger cooperators, we see that this is not going to be long-term viable. We're seeing how governments are fickle. We're seeing
Mm,
that we need to get more entrepreneurial. And it is pretty amazing how entrepreneurial social co-ops are.
Yeah.
It's
mhm,
like a startup culture,
Yeah.
and they go to government, they go to business, and they say, you know what we do? We do social innovation.
Yeah.
And not only
mm,
Yeah.
that, we're experts at it. And you guys are not good at it. So you need to enable us and find us funding because we are
Yeah.
fixing something you don't know how to fix at
Yeah.
this level of quality.
Yeah.
It's really pretty impressive. But the takeaway for Americans is that we know about the nonprofit industrial complex, and we know that's kind of falling apart. So we got to figure out how to use the market, not to become capitalists, but just to use the markets as
Yeah.
people have done for centuries in
Yeah.
order to keep our local enterprises going.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of lessons from the Italian model, and I think that might be one of them.
Yeah. Thank
Anybody
you for
else
that. I
want to
agree.
jump in? Jump. I think the other thing, tell me if you agree, Matt, the lesson for Americans looking at these little enterprises, these thousands of small enterprises, is that they're all part of an ecosystem. They're not really standalone businesses
Exactly.
in our sense. We take a little business of any kind and say, good luck.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
in
yeah.
Italy, you're like wrapped around with all
Yeah.
kinds of associations and consortia
Totally.
and co-op banks. And it's
Totally.
just a whole different landscape. Russell Fox has a question.
Um,
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I was working on some stuff, so I was partly distracted, and
It's
you
okay.
addressed this. But what Elias just mentioned in terms of the importance of respecting the genius of the market as a human phenomenon that goes back not just centuries, but millennia, that
Yeah.
long precedes capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really important point. And I feel that it's a point that is often missed by left critics of certain co-ops. I have particularly encountered this in terms of criticisms of Mondragon.
Mhm.
Um, you know, but I also recognize that embracing the logic of the market, it requires embracing at least some elements of economic behavior that capitalism has very effectively, well, arguably twisted in ways that would make it better to eschew entirely. But to eschew them entirely and yet remain in a space where you can make use of market logics is very difficult.
Yeah.
Specifically, I'm talking about the issue of growth. the fact that Mondragon has expanded into other countries and has
Mhm.
had to adapt in all sorts of different ways in order to maintain the co-op principles in numerous different expansive contexts. I mean, that's the sort of thing that makes me think that the left criticisms have a point. So, obviously, the most important questions are practical ones, but for the eggheads among us, of which I am definitely one, thinking about how we are to make use of market realities as we elaborate
Yep.
upon cooperative principles, um, while negotiating the fact that those market realities are going to push us towards growth, towards maximization, towards
Yep.
expansion. I mean, that's just a really difficult balance to walk. How do you think Italian
Yep.
co-ops have done in balancing, making use of market realities, but also still maintaining their co-op character when they face pressures of scale, pressures of expansion, and so forth?
John, I saw you just did this. Did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, yes, I do. I'd like to make a very important point with regard to markets because we conflate two terms which are in fact the opposite. That is capitalism and free markets.
Yep.
Mhm.
Those are not the same. And in fact, capitalism is the mortal enemy of free markets. And because we simply fail to define the term,
Sure.
a free market is, I believe, any market where the same or similar goods can be purchased from a large variety of
Yep.
firms.
Yep.
And that does not characterize capitalism and never
Sure,
has.
it surely doesn't, and it doesn't presuppose it either. Juliet, do you have something on this, or do you want to answer this question and then come to you? Okay, great. So I think, thank you. Oh, thanks, Brian. Great to see
Thanks,
you.
Brian.
I mean, I think the Italians cooperative movement has really mastered using the market. I mean, they've got it down and maybe a little bit too well. So two examples. One is the co-ops had a hard time insuring themselves, like business insurance, back in the 60s. There's a lot of politics involved. It was the red cooperatives had a hard time. And so what they did is they found a failed insurance company based in Milan and they just bought it. They bought it for nothing. But they basically bought it for its license to operate as an insurance company. And fast forward to 2000 and I don't know, three maybe. They are one of the largest insurance companies and banks in Italy. They're trying to buy the Italian National Labor Bank. They're making all these moves, and they've got this sophisticated series of holding companies. So like the cooperative movement through a core number of cooperatives owns 50% of a holding company, which owns 50% of a holding. It was like 8 different holding companies to own this publicly traded bank. And the bank leadership itself was really just acting as any capitalist would. And they got involved in some scandals. Um, and now so they didn't buy that bank, but they're still one of the largest banks in Italy, maybe one of the largest in Europe. They're now getting into private health insurance. And one of the big problems for public health in Italy is I, as a consumer, have a choice. Do I go get my colonoscopy at the local hospital or at a private clinic? Now, if I do it at the local hospital, it won't cost me anything. But if I do it at the private clinic, I might not have to wait 9 months. It'll cost me something, but I'm pulling public subsidies into the private clinic in that case. So this bank, an insurer owned by the cooperative movement, is opening private clinics, which are making it easier for people to divert public funds to private clinics because I have a right to do that as a citizen. I'm not paying totally out of pocket for that. It's not I don't want to unfairly criticize them, but I think that's an example of where you run into those paradoxes when you embrace that logic. And how do we want to deal with that? Another example is more outright corruption. It's called co-op service. It's a security guard co-op. So if you go to the museum, if you go to the bank, the guy with the gun, mostly guys, and the vest at the door is a co-op member. Well, what they did was they the leaders had planned on making investments in a privately held, maybe publicly traded Belgian company that provided security service. And they went and told their members, hey, go buy shares in this company because we're going to go buy them.
Hmm.
And that was deemed illegal and a violation of the use of those indivisible reserves because they were using indivisible reserves in a way that indirectly benefited the individual member. I think people could have gone to jail. I don't think they did, but it was that bad. So
It's Italy.
I think they've absolutely mastered the market. Russell, I agree with you that we have to be comfortable using the market and really just wading into those contradictions. And I
Yeah.
think when you become too divorced from a social movement, then maybe that's where some of the accountability falls apart.
Yeah.
If you talk to the labor movement, they will tell you how horrible co-ops are and how they're
Hmm.
just privatizing social services. I don't think the answer to the problem of privatizing social services in Italy is to say there should be no social cooperatives. There's a lot of social cooperatives doing a lot of good. Juliet,
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes, I realize we're at time, so I don't know,
I'm
you
fine,
want to
that's
but
right. We're
close?
okay. We're okay. Go
You're
ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
All right. I'm curious about co-op governance. And in your hourglass slide, Matthew, you talked about how, it is effective at the uh, at the top end. Yeah, let's see. There we go. Member assembly, but
yep,
yet we would be disappointed if we're actually speaking about participatory governance or
management,
like real
management.
hands-on. And so I'm wondering if there are examples, knowing that a lot of the worker co-ops may be smaller. Are there some models or examples of uh, types of more participatory rather than just, voting on, a handful of board, directives, but actually, um, yeah, just more pushing the envelope in terms of engagement.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. So I want to like one just point of clarity. I I don't want you to think that there's not significant participation and discussion and democracy at the level of governance. So, the board is directly elected by the co-op. The budget for the enterprise, and we're talking about businesses, they're I can't remember these are very large global businesses. So the budgets are being debated before they're passed. Decisions about capital investments, about expansion, and then the board. So the CEO in a co-op is hired by the board. They may or may not be a member, but all of the management, the members of the board have like a portfolio. And so if I'm the president, I'm working hand in hand with the CEO. So it's not this hands-off kind of a model. But I think if you're looking for things like, I mean, the extreme would be sort of like Michael Albert's Paricon. You're not going to find any Paricon happening at the level of making schedules, making decisions about what to produce this week, when. You're not going to see this like radical job rotation where, the CEO is one day meeting with investors and then he's cleaning the bathrooms the next day and then he's operating equipment. I think in the smaller co-ops, but this is more a function of their size. So if you visit like a recent worker buyout, it's a company that has 15, maybe 20 employees. 10 of the workers are members and they just bought out the business. And it's going to feel a lot more, the way we're hoping to see. But I would say it's probably more a function of it's a small business with 10 owners rather than this vision around participatory. If you looked at the way my small business practices consulting group works, the positive spin is, wow, look at the participation. The flip side is tyranny of structuralistness. This is crazy. It's just a small business that doesn't know how to. I say that lovingly. Um, but I think the model in Italy really evolved around its democratic governance. and but day-to-day management, it's going to be traditional, and I think it's a little too traditional. You've got examples of private businesses that are probably doing things that are more progressive, like more
Hmm.
pushing the envelope than the co-ops. The reason
Hmm.
for that, and I won't spend too much time in it, but in the 1970s there was this movement around worker self-management, and there were these spectacular failures where these long, well-known, long-standing businesses that were part of like a significant employer in the community, they went out of business, and they said we can't afford that to happen. So we've got to really tighten up on how we manage. They probably did overcorrected.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. All right. Matt, that was great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. I think all of our wheels are turning after that, and that's the whole idea. So that was good. We're going to put this up on the YouTube channel for the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center if you want to check back on it at all. And thanks to everybody for coming today. And Matt, that was terrific.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's so humbling. I really appreciate that.
Thank
All right.
you.
Hopefully you have my email. So,
Yeah. Everybody stay
grazie a
well.
te.
Ciao.
Ciao, arrivederci.
Ciao tutti.
Bravissimo.